Perfect. Okay, so this is the final part today. Maybe we'll finish a little early because it's Friday. So we talked about all of the other annual returns, Forms 941, Form 940, W-2s, W-3s, all of that good stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about corrections today. So what happens if you make a mistake? So corrections usually come with a C behind the name of the form, which is super convenient because it's easy to remember. So if you're correcting a W-2, you use a form W-2C. And this needs to happen when wages have been reported incorrectly, or taxes have been reported incorrectly, or a social security number is wrong, or something like that. Similar to a W-2, the W-2C consists of 6 parts. All of those parts go to different places. 3 of them go to the employee, 1 for the employee's state return, 1 for the employee's federal return, and 1 for the employee's records. And then 1 is for the Fed, 1 is for the employer's copy, and then 1 gets sent into the state as well. So all of those forms are very similar to the W-2. The regular W-2, W-2C has the same idea. You do not have to file a corrected W-2 or W-2C if the error is less than $100, or $25 if the error is in regards to tax withholding amounts. That being said, if an employee does come to you and say they want a corrected W-2, even if it's less than $100, you do have to furnish that to them. So keep that in mind. A Form W-2C does not need to be filed with the SSA or Social Security Administration to correct an employee address only, or if the data corrected is only for state or local. They don't care to have a copy of that if you're not correcting anything that's actually for the Fed. So if federal income tax, Social Security, or Medicare is discovered before the Form 941 is filed, then errors must be reported and paid on that Form 941. If it's discovered after the form is filed, then employers can avoid paying interest if they report on a 941X as soon as possible after discovering the error, but no later than the due date of the current quarter's Form 941. So same with additional Medicare tax as well as Social Security or regular Medicare tax. If an employer withholds too little from an employee's wages or federal income tax, Social Security tax, or Medicare tax, then the undercollected amount may be deducted from other compensation given to the employee. So they could deduct it at a later time to make up for that. Over withheld federal income tax, additional Medicare tax must be repaid to the employee. The repayment must occur before the end of the calendar year during which the error was made. All right. So Form W-3C goes along with Forms W-2C. If you've corrected your Form W-2, you also have to correct your Form W-3. So when you file a W-2C, if you do it online through the SSA website, then it also creates a W-3C, which is also e-filed to the SSA. And then you'll want to keep a copy of that and make sure that the employer keeps a copy of that. 941X is to correct 941s that are incorrect. So if employers have properly repaid withheld amounts to employees, they can claim a credit against the taxes due by marking an adjustment on the 941X and then asking for a refund. You could also get a credit applied to the next quarter. For Social Security or Medicare tax payments, the adjustment must be made no later than the due date of the Form 941 filed for the quarter in which the error was discovered, but no later than 3 years from the due date of the return filed which contained the error. For Forms 941, 943, 944, and 945, the period of limitations due date is April 15th of the year after the close of the tax year. By the way, April 15th is my birthday. Just throwing that out there. All right, wages, tips, and other compensations are increased. So say you reported $9,000 as total wages, tips, and compensation on line 2 of your third quarter Form 941 for 2019. In July of 2020, you discovered you had overlooked $1,000 in tips from one of your part-time employees. To correct the error, you're going to figure the difference from what you reported versus what you should have reported. So the difference is $1,000. Another example, you reported $9,000 as wages, tips, and other compensation on line 2 of your fourth quarter 2019 Form 941. In December of 2020, you discovered you included $2,000 in wages for one of your employees twice. So to correct the error, you're going to do exactly the same thing, figure out the difference, but this time the corrected amount is lower than the original amount, therefore it's a negative. So it'd be negative 2,000. Pop quiz, you have to remember back to yesterday. This is not fair to Felicia because she wasn't with us yesterday. Form 943 is which one? Quarterly employer's tax return, annual employer's tax return, annual employer's tax return for agricultural employers, or annual tax return for non-payroll federal taxes.
Can I answer?
Can you answer? Of course you can.
I think it's C.
C.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
I would agree.
Don't make that face, Melissa.
941 is the first one, the quarterly employer's tax return. Annual employer's tax return is the 944, and that's only if you have less than $1,000 liability and you're a 944 filer with the IRS. Felicia is correct. 943 is the employer's tax return for agricultural employees, and 945, the last one, which is the annual tax return for non-payroll federal taxes. Good job. Okay. Correcting returns for an 843. An 843 is a claim for refund and request for abatement. So Form 843 you can use Form 843 to request an abatement of an overassessment or the unpaid portion of an overassessment if more than the correct amount of the interest or penalties has been assessed. Generally, you're going to file a separate Form 843 for each tax period and each type of tax. Employers cannot use Form 843 to request an abatement of tax or income tax withholding overpayments. Employers must use tax form that corresponds to the tax return previously filed to make an adjustment or claim a refund or abatement of Social Security and Medicare taxes or income tax withholding overpayments. So bottom line, if you filed a Form 941, to correct it, you're going to use a 941X. A 943, you're going to correct it using a 943X, and a 944, you're going to correct it using a 944X. Deceased employees can get kind of complicated. Wages paid to a deceased employee's estate or legal representative after the employee dies, but in the same year of death, are not subject to federal income tax withholding, but they are subject to Social Security, Medicare, and FUTA. Wages paid to a deceased employee's estate or local representative after the year of the employee's death are not subject to federal income tax withholding or Social Security, Medicare, or FUTA, and should be reported only in box 3 of Form 1099 MISC, which we talked about those ones yesterday. And that Form 1099 MISC would be in the name of the beneficiary of the payment. So if it's in the same year the employee dies, it is subject to Social Security, Medicare, and FUTA taxes. If it's after the year the employee dies, then it's not subject to those things. Form 4070 is the employer's report of tips to the employer. It is for employees to provide the total of all tips the employee receives in a period of time no longer than 1 month. Employees receiving less than $20 in tips are not required to report those tips to the employer. Form 70 requirements. Employers are not required to provide Form 4070 for employees to report tips. Employers can use a variety of methods, including electronic reporting. In addition, employers can require tips to be reported more frequently than once a month. So I know a lot of our employers have either allow their employees to make adjustments in their time system to include their tips, or they have maybe just a different paper that the employee turns in with their time card that says the amount of tips. There's lots of different ways that they can do it, but that's what Form 4070 is for, but it's not required. You can use other methods. Form 8027 is the employer's annual information return of tip income and allocated tips. So this is the employer's side of it. It's used by large food and beverage establishments when the employer is required to make annual reports to the IRS on receipts from food and beverage establishments and tips reported by employees. Form SS4 is the application for an EIN. So when you're first starting a company, that's what you fill out to get an actual EIN from the IRS. Pop quiz. Voiding a check issued in error after all returns were filed will require all of the following procedures except a refund by other taxing agencies, a refund to the employee, a refund by the IRS, submission of Form W-2C. You guys are too good. It is B. Voiding a check that was not constructively received in a subsequent year requires correcting wages and taxes reported using Forms W-2C, 941X, and the appropriate state forms. Since the employee never received the money, no refund is due to the employee. Good job. Okay, so we're going to practice a little bit, and this kind of goes back to more of what we did yesterday, the 941. Maybe it was 2 days ago. I don't know. It's all getting confused at this point. So I thought we would just practice and take a look at an example and actually fill out a 941. So on this example, we're going to complete a Form 941 as well as a Schedule B for third quarter of 2020 for East Bridge Closers, a semi-weekly depositor that pays wages bi-weekly on Fridays. So there's all their good information. So if I take the information a piece at a time, the first pieces of the information that they gave us were the name, address, and EIN of the company. So to put those on the 941, we're going to take the name and the EIN, and we're going to put those in the appropriate places on the 941. At the bottom, I did include the very top of each page has to have that employee name as well as the EIN on each page. So I have been a culprit of forgetting to put that on there. So make sure that you remember to put that on the top of each page of your 941 and your 941Xs. If you're ever doing a correction, that's the one I got in trouble on. So make sure that you're doing that. The address obviously goes on the address box. And then we are doing third quarter. So you're going to mark the checkbox for third quarter of 2020. So keep going. We're going to go down to the next section of the 941. The number of employees is going to go on line 1. Again, this is the number of employees on the 12th of the last month of the filing period. So if you're filing for first quarter, you're going to look at the number of employees paid on the pay period that includes March 12th. If you're doing second quarter, it's going to be the number of employees paid in the period containing June 12th. Same for third, same for fourth. Your total wages, tips, and other compensation is going to go on line 2. Your Social Security wages are going to go on line 5A. Your Medicare wages are going to go on line 5C. Your federal income tax withholding is going to go on line 3. You're going to do math. I know that's scary. And then you're going to get to your numbers that go in column 2 for lines 5A, B, C, and D, depending if you have stuff that goes in each of those. In this particular example, they don't have any tips and they don't have anything that's subject to additional Medicare withholding. So to check and make sure that everything is correct, I'm going to look at the actual Social Security tax that was withheld and the Medicare tax that was withheld. Now, the withheld portion is only half of what actually is due because the employer also pays the other half. So if I look at those numbers and I take half of them, I want to make sure that the numbers that were the withheld portion of from my employees' checks are half of what I got on the calculation when I did my 941. So much math, especially on a Friday.
But it was really colorful.
Thanks. I was running out of colors. I was like, man, we gotta have less boxes or something because I was getting to the end of my color palette. Okay, so moving on, this is the whole first part of the 941. We're gonna do some more math and we're gonna add our two numbers from column 2. If you had 4 numbers, you would add them all up, and those are going to go in line 5E. Then we're going to take our tax withheld, which is on line 3. We're going to add it to that number that we just calculated, and we're going to get our total tax before any adjustments, and that goes on line 6. We're going to add all of our liabilities together that we paid, and we're going to get a total of $435,900, and that number is going to go on line 13. So the above lines we calculated all from the tax that was withheld and doing math. And on this particular example, they didn't have any adjustments for sick pay or group term life or anything like that, so we didn't have to worry about any of that. So since our total deposits for the quarter equal our total adjustments, then we get a balance due of 0, which of course is always a good thing. So on page 2 of the 941, the very top section asks you about, actually I think it's page 3 now because they've added pages because of COVID. So this section asks you to tell what kind of depositor you were. So in this particular case, they told us that it's a semi-weekly depositor, which means I'm going to check that box down there at the bottom that says you're a semi-weekly depositor. And because I checked that box, that now means that I have to file a Schedule B. So let's look at what that looks like. So we're going to find each of our tax liability dates. It is important that you remember that what goes on the Schedule B is the date of the liability, not the date of the payment. Many employers deposit them on the same day as the liability was incurred, so they would be the same in that case, but they're not required to be deposited the same day depending on what schedule you're on. So what goes on the 941B Schedule B is the actual liability date, not the payment date. In this case, they happen to be the same. So the July 3rd, we're going to take our month 1, find the 3rd day, and we're going to put that number in that box. July 17th, we're going to again stay in our month 1 section and find the 17th and put that in that box. 31st, find the 31st, and again, we're still in month 1. And then the total liability for the month, you would add all 3 of those numbers up, and that would go in the total liability box for month 1. August 14th, now we're down in month 2. So we're gonna find our month 2 section, go to the 14th day, and put in our liability amount. 28th, again, staying in month 2, find the 28th. Again, you would add, this time there's only 2. You would add those together and put that in the total liability for month 2. September 11th, now we're down in month 3, find the 11th. And again in month 3, find the 25th, add those all up, and that's what goes in the tax liability for month 3. And then we're gonna do some crazy math, add all of that stuff up together, and the total liability down for the quarter gets put at the bottom. That number better match what you paid for the quarter, and it also better match what you said your liability was on your Form 941. Well, I talked way too fast, clearly. So, does anybody have any questions?
I do not. You did great.
Oh, thanks.
Great job.
Rebecca, do you have any good hints for the test on this section?
So I do have a couple of things that I would just like to point out. Make sure that you know those different forms and what you would have to do. So that one test or that little pop quiz that we had of, what would you do if you were voiding a check? And that was a specific scenario question that I had. So make sure you know those, make sure that you know what each form does, and also make sure you know how those forms are submitted, whether it's the fire system or, all of those things.
So the one system that I don't think I necessarily talked about in here is the AIR system, and the AIR system is where ACA filing happens. That one's easy for me to remember because it starts with an A, AIR, ACA.
Right.
So those two go together. And then the fire is specifically for 1099s. You can do a few other forms through Fire too.
I know I specifically had the ACA air system, and because I did the same thing in my head, and the fire system. Those were the two that were definitely noted on my test. So
Yeah, and I think that those are the main ones. So
Mhm.
ACA goes with air. That's a good one to remember.
agree.
I was trying to think of any other things that I could think of. Obviously, the 941 is much more in depth now with COVID because they've added so many lines to it. But so I don't know if how many questions they'll ask that are specific to those COVID lines, but they are on the 941. The FFCRA stuff goes in the lines 5 where all the Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes are calculated, and then there's a worksheet 1, and worksheet 1 is dealing with FFCRA as well as ERC. So I just don't know with those changes if those will be on the test or not, but could be.
Super.
Anything else?
Mm-mm. Not from me.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining me. I hope that you're not going to be mad that you have an extra 20 minutes of your day on this Friday. But feel free to email, call, send up smoke signals if you have questions. Let me know.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.